and let's go. So last session we went through UVing and creating UVs for simple objects and slightly more complex objects. We covered UVing, and before that we did cover optimization as well. So to go through what we've been doing so far, we started out with simple blockouts of our models so that we get all their proportions and shapes pretty much right using our references and everything. And after we did our blockouts, we did a detail pass where we went through every single component of the object, and we actually modeled it in detail. So stepping away from that simple blockout, which we only used as a size starting point. And after we've pretty much detailed our asset as much as we wanted to, or as much as it was necessary, we're ready to start making a version that's a little bit more optimized because we might have been a little messy with our modeling, depending on how it's been going. So after we did our kind of detail pass on the asset, we have an optimization pass. And the optimization pass essentially removes any unnecessary details. Let me turn on this. Removes any unnecessary details or any details that we're not going to see from a certain distance from the model. And you can see that my detailed version is 19,000 triangles. It's 10,000 triangles. And my optimized version is only 8.8. So we reduced it somewhat during that process. After we have our optimized version, we went through and removed any duplicated areas, and we started the UV process. And this is the last part that we got to. So let me go to the UV section. Let's go general, modeling, UV editor. So if I click this character, you're going to see that I have pretty much finished the UV process. And I showed you guys this last week as well, going through each component one by one and UVing them one by one. Now, what's the next step after we've UV'd, right? What do we do after we've done our UVing? Well, we can either go to Substance Painter, or we can work on a high resolution version of the model. To explain to you why we would go to a high resolution version of the model, I'm first going to take you to Substance Painter and explain to you the stuff that's going on over there. Now let me just make sure that everything is fine here. That's fine. Let's hide this. Okay, so let's go to Substance Painter. I'm going to just minimize everything, and I'm going to go to Substance 3D Painter. This is the new Adobe icons, which nobody likes, but this is what Substance Painter is. Let's open that. Wait for it to start up. If any of you do have questions or want to say anything, just unmute yourselves and do so, because I won't be able to open up Discord whilst I'm doing this streaming. So just let me know if there's something you want to say. Okay, so this is Substance Painter. I closed the little pop-up box that came up. If it's your first time opening it in uni, you'll probably have to put in your student username. But this is Substance Painter right here. And by default, I wonder if I can reset the UI. Right, so by default, this is what it's going to look like for you when you start it up. Now, let's just put our model here, our UV'd model that we've UV'd already. We're pretty much finished with the modeling. We've done our UVs. We've optimized it. It's pretty much ready. We don't have any of the copies of the legs and stuff for the antenna in there. We just want what we have here. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to select our whole kind of object here, either from the top group that we've put it in or just selecting everything like this. And I'm going to go to File and then Export Selection. And then you want to make sure that you go down here, and the file type you choose is an Fbx Export. This is the kind of export you send to certain programs and to game engines. So almost all your game objects will be Fbx when you send them to a game engine. This is what we use very often. There is another file type called OBJ, But that's a much more simplified file type, and it can't hold animation, and it can't hold a lot of other stuff, so it's not generally used for game engines, but it does have some other uses. So we select Fbx Export. I'm just going to throw it on the desktop and call it test. And on the side here, you have a lot of options you can change. Now, again, as I always say, don't worry about all the options. You only need a few. I wonder if I can reset what they're like. I don't think I can. But by default, you'll probably have smooth mesh and one of these turned on. I turned them off, and I only turn off in this geometry options the first one and the third one, smoothing groups and tangents and binormals. So these are the settings that you need to remember. We don't have animation right now, so we're going to turn that off. And we're going to keep scrolling down, and I think everything else should be fine. And after you've selected FBX, set the settings as I just showed you, and chosen your location and your name, I'm just going to click Export Selection. And that's going to take that object, and it's going to put it in my desktop here. Great. And depending on which version of Windows you have, you can probably double-click it, and it's going to open up in a 3D viewer or something. But I have Substance open, so clearly it opens it up in Substance, which is not what I wanted. But that's fine. You can also right-click, open with 3D viewer. Let's close this because I don't want to see it. Go away. Go away. So you can right-click, open with, and you can open it with Paint 3D, which is Windows default kind of 3D viewer. Or is it 3D viewer? Is that what it calls it? Probably 3D viewer. Yeah, that's it. Close this. And you can see that it's going to open up in here in Windows' default program. Obviously, we don't need that. So we're going to close that. Don't save, don't save, don't save. Go away. Thank you. But we do want this file because we're going to go to Substance Painter. So remember this. This is Substance Painter. This is how it will open up for you. And we're going to go to File, New. And we want to make a new file. We're going to choose Unity HD render pipeline as our template. And we just need to choose the file, right? We just click where it says File here. We click Select. Go to our desktop, and we find the file that we just exported, the FBX that we just exported from Maya, right? So we're going to find that. We're going to click that. And we're going to open it. The rest we can leave for now. We don't need to change anything else over here for the moment. Click OK. And there we have it. Our object is in Substance Painter. And it controls pretty much the same as Unreal, as the same as Maya. Now you notice we have some issues here. We have some problems here with these legs and things. And that's because I believe we have not exported it correctly. So if I go back here, I want to make sure we only grab this. We don't want any of our hidden legs in our UV version. I'm just going to delete those. Usually it should be fine even if I don't delete them, but I'm just going to make sure I select everything like this. There we go. Let's do an export again. Desktop, test FBX. Yeah.
So I was just going to say, could you just go through the saving settings again?
The saving settings. All right, so you go to File, Export Selection, and on the side here, you have a bunch of settings, and you're going to have this drop-down called File-Specific Options, and one of them is going to be, they're going to probably show up like this, and one of them is going to be Geometry. You open up Geometry, and you just make sure that only your first and third options are ticked. Smoothing groups, make sure it remembers which sides are smooth and which sides are hard. And tangents or binormals does something similar.
Okay, thanks.
And then you go to animation and you turn that off as well. Let's throw that and test. Let's hope it works this time and it doesn't give me nonsense. Also, I want this to close already that I opened by accident. No. Okay. You know what? We're just gonna let it do its thing. We're just gonna be like, go away, minimize. Whatever. We're going to go back to Substance. Let's do that again. New, Unity HD. Just select our test again. Click OK. Discard the changes. There we go. That's what we wanted. We didn't want any of the duplicates because we add those in a little bit later. Right. So what's the first thing you do? The first thing you do is you fix your UI. because the default UI is abysmal. So I'm just going to do that the way I like it. I'm gonna move all of these material stuff right at the bottom. I'm gonna put them right down here. Here, I'm gonna move these layers in the same window as this because I never need both of them at the same time. And I'm gonna move this texture thing in the paint here because I never need it at the same time. And now I'm gonna explain to you what they all do. So Substance Painter is literally a program where you can paint on the model, but it's not literally all you do. This is not really how you're supposed to do it. You have access to your whole model. You have access to the UVs as well, and you can switch those in here by choosing 3D, 2D, 3D only, 2D only. So you have access to like the model, the 3D model and its UVs. And you can essentially paint on it the same similar way you would do on Photoshop, but using layers in the top right panel here. So the first panel I want to tell you about is the layers panel. Is at the top, it's the top right here. And the layers panel allows you to create empty layers like this, which just allow you to paint on an object. And it allows you to create fill layers, which pre-fill the entire object with a color and other kinds of information like how shiny it is and how metallic it is and things like that. So these come pre-filled. And that's a good time for me to show you a second panel, which is down here, called Properties. And depending on what selection you have and what tool you're using, you're going to have different properties appear here. So if I select the Layer menu, it's just going to give me properties mainly for the brush that I'm going to use and how I'm going to paint on it. If I put it above, you'll be able to see. Whereas if I select the Fill layer here, you see it's going to be showing me properties about what color to use and other information here that I can change and turn on and off. Right. Now, going back to the Layers menu, yes, you can create just solid colors of stuff, but if you right-click on any of these layers that you're going to create here, just like Photoshop layers, if you right-click, you can add a mask, so a black or a white mask. And what I usually do is I will add a single color, and then I will add another color above it, and I can right-click, and I can add a black mask. What is a black mask? A mask just tells you where something is going to appear. And if it's black, it's not visible. If it's white, it's visible. And when I've added a black mask, I've said, well, this white thing is not going to be visible anywhere. You can then right-click on either of these and add a bunch of other adjustments and deformers. And I just want to briefly show that you can then right-click on the black mask, and you can add a paint layer, similar to how you can paint on a normal layer. And I can paint in where I want this mask to be visible, or where I want this layer to appear, where I want the mask to actually show. And you're going to see that it actually changes up here. Depending on whether you click on your color or your mask, you're going to have different stuff that you've added to it visible. So you can see now that if I select this gray color that I had added, I can now go back and even change it more whilst the one below it is still here. Now, this is obviously not how you would normally texture your asset, but I just want to explain to you that it's a layer-based system where you can turn visibility on and off and use a lot of different tools and functions to essentially change how you draw and what you draw. But the core information that you're drawing at any time, I'll just add like this. The core information that you're drawing at any time is simply color, height information, whether it sticks out or sticks in, shininess information, and metallic information, right? Whether it's metallic or not. That's the only information that you're painting on here, and that's going to allow you to change how the asset is visible. Now, when you insert an object into Substance Painter, actually the very first thing you need to do is go down here to your texture set settings window. So this is another window you should be aware of. And this is actually going to decide by default how your asset is visible and what details your asset has. So we just have the raw 3D model in here. And if I just go down here, there's something called bake mesh maps. And this is when I'm going to start explaining to you what baking means and what that is in the stage of the modeling pipeline. So let's just go back for a second. We went through Maya and we modeled our asset, and we made our whole asset, and we've kind of created the shape that we want. But we have absolutely no surface detail on the asset whatsoever. We just have this gray kind of preview surface, right? And we went through and we UV'd it all so that we get this flat 2D version of the model, which allows us to put color and all sorts of different information on it, so that when we put this in the game engine, it's going to look the way we want it to look, right? Now, the kinds of information that we can put on it, the kind of images and paint that we can put on this isn't limited only to color. It's limited to all those things I just showed you in Substance Painter. You can do color, you can do shininess, you can do metallic and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things you can actually do apart from just, where did my details panel go? Oh no. Window. Properties. There we go. Apart from just color. And by default, if we go to the texture set settings, when we put in our asset, you see there's all of these empty spaces here right at the bottom. These are different maps. I'm just going to go and click on Bake Mesh Maps, get these options. I'm just going to click Use Low Poly here. Don't worry about exactly what this is doing. And I'm just going to bake, click Bake, right? So this has done a bake. What is a bake, essentially? A bake is where the model calculates either itself or a high-resolution version of itself, and it decides what kind of surface information it needs to start off with. And the surface information isn't color in this sense. It's what kind of surface details it has. It's how the light should hit it. It's a bunch of technical maps that all do different things, and they also help you in actually painting the model and making it look a certain way. And you can see now that actually it looks a little bit different. So if I just delete all of these maps again, you're going to notice how it starts to look very, very basic. Now let me just bake those one more time. And you're going to see that actually the 3D details of the model and a lot of other things start to be a lot more visible. And essentially, it just looks a little bit clearer. Whilst we're painting the model, we can also use these preset maps to help us in putting detail on the model and actually just going through the whole process itself. Now, I've told you before about a high poly and a low poly, right? And you guys were kind of wondering what that meant. So essentially, I was saying that in a game engine, your 3D asset can't be too high resolution because the computer is going to have trouble actually running it. And that's why we can't take something straight out of ZBrush, for example, and just put it in a game engine. Now, I've done something here where I've created a high poly, higher resolution version of this model, where I've put in a few kind of extra details that we didn't have before, extra lines and stuff, kept it rounder, did some extra little details here, stuff like that, added like these extra bits. And I've also taken this version further and added some chips and some breaks and stuff, and really like increased a lot of the detail that's on the model. And this version is not too much higher resolution than the UV. So the UV one is about 3000 without all the copies of the legs and stuff in there. And this one is actually 7, so it is actually quite a lot higher, more than 2 times higher than that. But what this is your high resolution version. This is a much higher resolution version of the model with a lot more detail, with a lot more stuff, but probably not something we want to put in a game engine, right? But we can still use this. So I'm just going to select all of this, and I'm going to click File, Export Selection, put it on the desktop, and call it High Poly. Just exporting it the exact same way. I'm going to go back to Substance Painter, right? And we have this little guy here, this little red guy. I'm going to go back to the texture set settings, and I'm going to go through this baking process again. And if you've been confused up till now, I hope that this is now going to make sense to you when I just show what this is going to do. Baking you're supposed to mainly do, you can do it just like this with the model by itself, but you're using it to get high resolution details onto a model which is not high resolution. So I'm gonna click Bake Mesh Maps here. I'm gonna untick this little box, use the low poly. I don't wanna use the low poly. I wanna use the high poly now. This is the low poly. I wanna use the high poly. I wanna get all of those details that I modeled onto this guy. So I'm gonna click this little page here next to the high definition meshes. This is what I want, high definition meshes. I'm gonna click this little page just to pick one. And I'll just click the high poly that I just exported. This thing here that has way more detail and way more resolution than the other one. And it's gonna show up here. And I'm gonna click, I'm gonna just increase the resolution of this map here. And I'm just gonna click bake now and just show you what's gonna happen. So what it's done, it's taken those, let me increase the resolution here. It should be fine. It's taken this, the details from the high poly, and it's projected them onto the low poly. It's essentially taken the details from the high poly and put them on the low poly. This is still the same model. This is still the same kind of, if I turn this on, you can see it's still the same wireframe. Let's just change this color so you can see the wireframe a little better. It's still the same wireframe. It's the same kind of simple model. It doesn't have all those extra little details and stuff. It's the same low resolution thing, but it actually has the high resolution details from the other one on it. Now they're a little bit janky, so I'm gonna redo that bake and just scroll down and add some anti-aliasing so they're a little bit smoother. Okay, and now you can see they're a lot smoother now. But this is what baking is used for. Baking is used for taking high-resolution details from a high-resolution version of your model, and this model doesn't need anything. It doesn't need UVs, it doesn't need texture, it just needs the shapes. And it needs to be in the exact same position as your low-resolution one. They need to be literally on top of each other in the 3D world. And all that needs to have is a bit of higher resolution. And then we put that into the correct place when we're doing our baking. And we do our baking, and it literally kind of bakes, it sets those details onto our low poly. And this is useful when we go into deeper texturing and we go into a lot of other stuff. So imagine if you're working on ZBrush and you make some really detailed assets, really detailed stuff, you make a lot of engraving or whatever and all that stuff. You can't take all of that into a game engine. So you create a low poly version, a lower resolution version, and you go through this baking process, and you can get those details on something which is low resolution. And this is all still completely flat. There's no change in the actual 3D model. It's a simulation. It's previewing the detail. It's pretending that the detail is there, but it actually isn't. It is still a completely flat surface here. But the way that it actually does the baking process and the things that it actually creates makes it look as if it is actually 3D details there. And I'm going to explain how it does all that in a little bit. So this is kind of a complex thing that to explain. It always is, because it's supposed to kind of bring all of the information that you're going through together. Why you have Maya and ZBrush, why you have a high and a low resolution model, why you have UVs, and how you actually start to texture. I'm going to move on in a second, but is there any questions right now about what I was just doing? And is anyone very, very confused about what's been happening just now? Or are people okay? Okay, all right. I'm going to take that as people are okay. If you do get very confused, if you are not sure what's happening here, send me a message after, and I'll explain it again. Now, I'm just going to go through and start normally texturing this thing. I just want to explain what the rest of this UI does. So essentially, you have your layers here. These are your layers that I was talking about before. You have a texture set list, which is all the separate objects that are painted in here, because you can split up your object into separate objects to texture it more easily. You have your properties here, depending on what you have selected. It shows you all their details. And you have your texture set settings, which shows you the maps for your baking, has some other settings here about your preview, and things like that. And this is where you go first to bake your asset and to get them working, get them started for actually texturing. Down here, you have a library of loads of different stuff. You have a lot of preset materials, which I don't want you to use, but they are fine for actually just checking and showing how different things and different details can show up on your asset. They're just preset materials. As soon as you put them on your model, they show up here, and then you can delete them. But you also have these little buttons here that show you other things like smart materials, which get applied to your model with these maps we've generated in mind, which all give different information and allow it to, put damage on the edges or make the surface lighter, the top parts lighter than the bottom parts and stuff like that. And again, they just get applied up here, and then you can delete them. And you have a lot of other stuff here. The main ones you probably use for now is the brush. When we start to actually paint, you have a bunch of brushes here you can use for when you are painting on the model. Let me grab something, different color, just to exemplify. We'll do that later. And on the side here, you have different tools that you can use when painting on the model. You have brush tools and erasers and other things. And we'll go through all of that as we start the texturing process, and other things up here to do with your brush size, etc., etc. Depending on what you select in terms of the tools you're using, this will change up here as well. Okay. So let's get started. What I usually do when I start painting a model after I've done my baking is I apply a base color to all the sections of the model. So I apply a base color for every different set of material. And I do have the reference here. And when I textured this before, because I have already gone through the texturing process for this, I put a solid color on every piece that has the same kind of material and color. So I put a solid color on all the blue bits, and a solid color on all the gray bits and dark gray bits. And the way I would do this is I'll delete all the stuff here. And I would add a folder, actually. I would call this blue metal base. It's just the base color. And then I would add a fill color, put that inside, make sure it's in there. And then I'm going to just change it to the color that I need. Something that's really useful is that if you have an image open on your screen, and you also have Substance Painter open on your screen at the same time, like this, when you go down here to your properties after creating a fill layer and choose the color, you can actually hold this eyedropper pressed, this little eyedrop button, you can hold it pressed, and anything you mouse over will be sampled, including other windows. So I can directly sample the color I want to use from the concept if I have a concept like this. So I'm going to do that. And this is a stylized character. I texture it a specific way because it's a stylized character. I'm just going to go through the standard texturing way, not worried about the fact that it's stylized. So I'm going to give it a base color for all of these areas. I'm going to choose how shiny it should be. I'm just going to keep it at a kind of average shininess, and whether it's made of metal or not, we can just pretend and say that, yeah, it's made of metal. Usually go all the way if it's metallic, but actually you can play around with it a little bit. It doesn't have to be too much. We can change how much shiny we want this to be. And we have like a base blue color that's slightly shiny and slightly metallic on this guy. But clearly that doesn't cover all of them. So what do we do now? Well, we can go back to this folder. And a cool thing is that pretty much anything you get here in your layers window, whether it's a fill layer or an empty layer or a folder, you can right-click and you can add a black mask. So again, I've added a black mask, and this doesn't cover any of the model anymore. Excuse me. I'm gonna mute myself just for a moment. Oh, okay, that's much better. So you have a black mask here, and just like I was putting on before, I'm gonna right-click it. I'm gonna add a paint layer so that I can actually paint on the mask and decide where I want this to show up. But as you can see, painting on exactly where I want this to go is going to be very, very tedious and annoying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to my tools on the left, and right now I have my brush selected. So I'm trying to paint on where I want this blue material here, this blue fill layer to appear. And I'm just gonna click the one that's the fourth one down. This is a selection tool where I can literally pick the faces of my model or drag and select the faces of my model I want this to appear on. And again, this is still really tedious because I have to go through here and click every single one, and it's just gonna take a million years. Thankfully, in the properties, see, I have this tool selected, so my properties change. There's these little options. So right now it's set to simply the square I click on, but I can change it to the object I click on as well. So when I click, the whole object is gonna turn blue. This whole object is gonna turn blue, and I can do that for these sections much more quickly and fill out all the pieces that I want to be this color. There we go. And that's pretty much that bit, that color done and placed over the model. And now I would do that for the rest of it. I would make one for dark gray bits. So I'll quickly just select the dark gray here. And I can make, I think the roughness for this is pretty good already. I'm just gonna make it a little bit metallic and maybe a little bit lighter as well, because I want the metallic to actually be visible. What if I make it really metallic? Nah, too much. And I'm gonna add a black mask to this as well, add our paint layer, grab our selection tool. You see how it gets much, much faster once you actually know what the process is and what you have to click. And just add it to every little section of the model here that I want to have that effect. This here, put that on there. These ones, yeah, I think these ones are as well. And I think the top one. And now I'm just gonna make one more, and this is gonna be I'm just gonna call this gray metal base. And this one is gonna be dark metal base, capital M. And let's add another fill layer to this. Make sure it's in there. Select the darker metal that we want to use. And make sure that the roughness is maybe a little less, rather a little more rough and a little more metallic. So it's quite a dark look. And again, we're just gonna add a black mask and choose where we want that mask to appear, which is the rest of the model's areas. Actually, that's already done. The inside, this back thing we can do. Now notice that these bolts are actually a different kind of metal, so I could do one for them as well. I'm gonna put one for the face because the face is pretty dark. And actually, I would want to make the face different. So let me add one for the face. I want that to be pretty much pitch black. It's very rough and not metallic. Or do I want it to be super dark metallic? Yeah, let's do that. Black mask. You don't always have to add a paint layer. You can just do it by default, just by clicking on the layer itself. But the useful thing about a paint layer is that you can actually have multiple ones that do different things. So now independently from one another, I can turn both of these paint layers on and off. I can change the opacity because these numbers on the side here change your opacity, or its overlay type. What's the good overlay type? Let's do like, I don't know. It's black. It's solid black, so it's not really going to come up as anything. But this is why adding a paint layer is useful, because it's non-destructive. Working in a way that's not destructive is really, really important. We want to be able to go back and forth, change things if we need to, et cetera, et cetera. And on top of this, in the face, because I still wanted to cover only the face, I'm going to add another paint layer that's going to be just bright white, not metallic, completely rough. And I'm going to add a black mask just to this white thing, not to the whole group, just to this white layer, because I want it to show up only in one place. Add a paint layer, grab my paintbrush. If I want to, I can turn on symmetry, and I'll have to just adjust it here with the symmetry adjustment options. Let's just move it over a wee bit, just a little bit. It's not exactly in the center. About 6.5. There we go, right in the center. And I can turn on symmetry and I can add the kind of face that I want. I'm not using a tablet right now. I recommend using one. Otherwise, it's going to be a little... but you do also have this smoothing brush up here that allows you to have a smoother... Maybe a bit too... Let's do this. And what was the reference? Oh no, I'm doing the wrong one. You can also hold shift. You can click once, then hold shift and click to make straight lines. He looks a little bit sad, doesn't he? Oh no. All right, let's leave it at that. I'm messing around with this too much. I didn't need to do that. I just wanted to. Anyway. And I'm just going to do the little thingies first before we run out of too much time. So these slightly brighter screws base. Add this solid color. Make sure it's metallic because I want them to be metallic. Slightly rougher, slightly brighter because the metallic makes it a lot darker anyway. And add a black mask, add a paint, and select these assets here. By holding Control and, actually not Control, Shift. Yeah, Shift and right-click allows you to change the lighting around the character. So you can see how it's looking. I kind of really don't like how these are looking. And I think it's because they're so metallic. Something like this works a little bit better. And we have a base color for pretty much our entire asset now. And we can go through a whole process of how to texture and texturing this character in a specific way. Now, depending on whether you have a stylized character or a realistic character, you would go through the next stages of texturing in a different way. And for that, I'm going to need to pre-record some videos for you on texturing and show you the different texturing methods that are available and how you can do that. You can obviously do some research yourself as well and look at some texturing methods. Substance Painter has so many resources out there, and there's a lot of stuff you can learn. We're only going to be teaching you the fundamentals and the foundation stuff and giving you direct one-to-one feedback that's right for you. But because there's so many things you can do, if you're looking for something very specific, it's always good to do some research yourself as well and look it up. It's like any other kind of course. If you do research yourself, you're going to actually excel further. Now, I'm going to stop this one here because I just wanted to show you how to set up your base materials, your starting colors, so that you can then do more detail, show you how you can do your baking so that the actual details of your high poly show up. But I want to show you kind of a final version that I've worked on. So I'm just going to file that, save as, desktop as test. And then I'm going to open the finished one and go through it bit by bit and what I've done for it. Wait for it to load. Okay, so this is the finished little robot here. It's pretty close. It's pretty close to the reference, but this is the finished robot here that I textured. And regardless of let's just go through and kind of tell you guys some of the stuff that I've been doing. I stopped labeling it at some point because I was doing too much stuff. Let's go to, this is the bot. This is the face is separate, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so first off, I have my bases here. Literally just what I showed you guys, the base blue materials and everything. Let me turn everything off, actually. I had just my base materials here. So it was like this by default. I did my baking, as you can see down here, using those same assets. You can see I get the same little bit of errors here as well. But I did my baking and I got this guy. And I had my base blue material first. And I did all of the other bases as well, but I added to each one some more as I went along. But let's just look at the base blue material for now. I just added the solid blue color. Oh, let me turn off the normals. I added a solid blue color, and then I added a slightly darkened blue color in certain areas using a certain tool, and then I lightened certain areas as well. And I did the exact same thing for the gray metal. If you look at the gray metal, it just has the solid color, then some detail highlights in certain places, and then some lighter highlights, and then some more highlights in other parts. And that's pretty much what I did for all the base colors. I just added different shadows and highlights to give them a better start. I also, before I used the high poly for my bake, and you saw before it was just smooth, I added the normal details myself, and that is something that you can also do that I can go into more detail in the next session. And after those ones, I added some greater details to the blue. So you can see that I added like different really strong highlights. Let me go through. And I added these indentations here. And this fill layer, has the color and has all of this stuff to change the color. But I've also adjusted its height. So there's also this height option that I very briefly showed before, and that makes it so that wherever you paint, it actually changes wherever it sticks in or out as well. So essentially, I lowered this, and now when I paint in the mask to decide where it shows up, it's also going to push it in to the model as well, because I have this height modifier changed as well. So anywhere I paint to make this color and height modifier appear, it's going to create indentation. And that's one of the very cool things about Substance Painter, that you can actually do stuff like that. And then I added a little bit of paint around the corners of these height indentations to just make it look like there's metal highlights around them and stuff like that. And then I was going through and I was essentially just adding different kind of details on the metal areas of the model, different kind of highlights, literally painting, adding, the surface details of this stuff. I think that's the other side. I used one of the maps that we bake here, the ambient occlusion, to create this much more comic-like darkening on the asset as well. And this is an automatic thing that you can do that's very simple. It wasn't it wasn't painted by hand. And I think I added the glow here as well. There's a way to add glow to your model as well. And actually, I just hand painted a little bit of green here to make it so that it looks like the glow is here and stuff like that, right? So very quick run through of the texturing of this model. It took a couple of days for me. If this was my first time, it probably would have taken me a couple of weeks, or at least a few more days longer. The first time you go through texturing something, it's going to take you a little while of trial and error, and you're going to struggle, and you're going to run into a situation where you're like, this is what I want to do. I don't know how to do it. This is what I want this to look like. I don't know how to make it look like this. I don't know how to use some of these tools. I don't fully understand how a lot of this works. That's completely fine. That's normal. This is why we're around. And in your support sessions, you gotta ask, and you gotta ask questions. You gotta ask for support and explanations and stuff if you are stuck and if you don't know what's going on, and things like that. That's a lot of information. It's a lot of information I just threw at you. We have about 12 minutes left. I've shown you how to take your asset from Maya and put it in Substance Painter. I've explained to you the UI of Substance Painter roughly. I've explained to you how to take a high resolution version of your model, whether you make it in Maya or in ZBrush or whatever, and actually apply those high resolution details to your Substance Painter character as well. Let me open up the last one that we had before, recent test, and all of that stuff. The last thing I want to explain to you guys is actually what a lot of these maps that you're creating here do. So you've got like, you're baking and it creates all of these maps. Now, some of these are just for Substance Painter because they help you with texturing, and I'm gonna explain those in a later time in a separate video specifically for all of these maps and what they do. But the main two that I want to explain to you is what they are the normal map, which is used in the game engine as well, and the Ambient Occlusion Map, which is used in game engine as well. So if I just hide these base colors for a minute, this as well. So you see that when we, before we baked our assets, it looked very plain and simple. And there's two reasons that it actually changed so drastically. One of them is the normal map, the other is the ambient occlusion map. So let's start with the ambient occlusion map. What does that do? It's a lot simpler. So the ambient occlusion map, if I bring up your free 2D view here as well, looks like this. It's just black and white color put over the object. And what happens is when the game engine or the program or whatever reads this map and knows, okay, this isn't a color map, this is an ambient occlusion map, this is a different kind of information. This is essentially a darkening map. Ambient occlusion is literally the little shadow you get when two things are really, really close together and they stop each other from getting the light in that little space where they're really close together. So if you take your hands and you point them towards the light, they're going to be lit up. If you bring your hands really, really close together, they're going to start shadowing each other when they're almost touching. If you bring your hand really, really close to the side of the table, it's going to start making a little shadow on the table and on your hand. That's because light is finding it harder to get to it. So what this is doing, it's reading your whole model and saying, okay, where are there things that are very, very close together? Where are there things that have a sharp angle or a soft angle moving around it? And should they be darker? And if they should be darker, it creates a darker spot in those areas. And if we turn off if we just go back to our normal material now, you're going to see that, okay, we can see our model pretty clearly. Let me take off this ambient occlusion map. Let me just exit. Suddenly, the whole model was very, very pale because that simulation of where are things slightly darker that map is creating, that image is creating, that information image, is not there anymore. If I just Control-Z that, bring the ambient occlusion map back, you can see this is what that map is doing. It's literally, and you can see the model just with that map visible, it's literally simulating where things are darker and where they are not. That's all it's doing. Very, very simple, very, very effective thing that's used in the texturing process. And that's how I got, and that's something that you can actually use whilst you're texturing as well to say, okay, I only want colors to appear where the ambient occlusion exists. And I'm going to do that really quickly now, just in an example. I'm going to add a black mask. I'm going to add a fill, so another color that I want to go on it. And there's a different way you can do that as well with generators, but I'm going to explain that another time. I'm just going to search for that map, for that thing. Ambient, it's in textures and it's here. Put that on here and change the color to red. So now this is only appearing where the ambient occlusion is white rather than dark. I'm actually going to reverse that. Don't worry about how I'm doing this part. This is improvisation. So now I've made this red color, which only appears where this ambient occlusion map that we've already created and are already using exists, but I'm telling it only make this color apply where that map is actually active, and I can dynamically change it to black, which is what I had done in that other asset to make it look more comic-like or I can actually change it. And the useful thing is I can change all these other details as well, like whether it's shiny or rough in that area, whether it's metallic in that area, and stuff like that. Anyway, that's ambient occlusion. It just changes where you have darkening. The other map I want to explain is the normal map. And the normal map actually is the simulation you see here of these details, which are actually not there. But when I rotate my light, it looks like they are because they're reacting to the light, right? So how does it do that? Well, let me take off the normal maps to show you what it looks like without it. And let me take off the ambient occlusion as well, actually. So without the normal map, it's just a solid white asset. It doesn't have any of the surface lighting details, which I was showing you before. You can see I'm rotating the light, but nothing's there. If I undo that so that the normal map comes back, I'm just going to delete the ambient occlusion so we're only looking at the normal. You can see that actually now it simulates that, but there really isn't anything there. If I make it so we can only see the normal map on the asset, this is what the normal map looks like. So look at the 2D view. This is what it looks like. It's this purple picture, essentially. It's this purple image, which isn't purple. It's kind of bluish or pink, where there are details from the high poly. So when your low resolution asset with its UVs starts looking at the high resolution asset that we made in Unreal, it's actually this reading, okay, so this detail should be somewhere here, right? So it actually creates this image onto your low poly's UVs, saying, okay, this is where those details should be. And it's using the purple color, the solid purple color, as saying, there's no change here. There's a smooth surface here. There's nothing that needs to be highlighted by the lighting. And it's using these other areas to simulate what direction that detail would be pointing in if it was there. So for example, this detail here, these little notches here, if I find them, I think they're over here. The middle is solid purple. It's saying this is a smooth area. The light should not, should just light this in a smooth way. But this area here is slightly blue. It's saying, okay, this part of the model, even though it's completely flat, there's nothing here, it's saying this part of the model in the high poly is pointing in this direction, is pointing left. This is what this color is saying. And the pink color is saying that it's pointing the other direction. And when the program reads this map into the normal slot, into the normal area here, it's actually going to, when I rotate my light, simulate it in that way. It's going to say, oh, well, this is where this direction is pointing in this way, so when the light is looking at it, it's shinier, right? Now, that's a really complicated way of saying that the normal map is essentially faking the details of your high-resolution model. That's pretty much, in general, what it's doing. It's faking the details on the model and making them visible when you're rotating a light around your model. And that's why it looks like we have details, even though we don't. Okay, those are the two maps I wanted to explain to you, ambient occlusion and normal map. And there's a bunch of other ones that do different things, and I'm going to make a separate video for those. So you guys can anticipate free videos over the next week, probably around by the time we have our next lecture, on 2 different texturing methods and on what the different maps do. For now, I hope that the things we covered so far are clear. I hope you get what it's all about and what it does. I hope you understand why we have a high poly and what Substance Painter does and how we can use its tools to do certain things, at least at a basic level. And when the next stuff comes up, when I show you like the new videos and other stuff, I hope those are more familiar and you'll be able to understand them clearly. That's everything I want to cover for now. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to stick around for 5 more minutes. I'm going to stay for 5 minutes after 12, 5 or 10, depending on if anyone has a lot of questions. But yeah, that's everything I wanted to cover. Have a nice Wednesday. It's Wednesday. And I'll see you guys in the in-person sessions if I pop around. Stick around if you have any questions. If not, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you, Stefan. Bye.
I don't know if the lack of questions is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, let me turn off the recording.